Well, I want to welcome you to Trinity Bible Church. I'm Peter Salmon. I'm our lead pastor here. I want to welcome you both here at 9 o'clock in the sanctuary and in the worship center this morning. And looking forward to continuing on into our feel-good series that we've been doing through the book of Revelation. It's a series of revelations, a series of visions from one of Jesus' closest disciples, John, the Apostle John, who these visions describe some things that were happening at his time, during his time, and things that have happened all the way up to our time today, and things that are even yet to come that'll be taking place at the end of time. And we've covered quite a bit of territory in Revelation so far, and I think we have three Sundays after this Sunday, so we have a lot of real estate left to go. So we're going to be moving quickly. I hope you have your Bible. Go ahead and move to Revelation chapter 12 today. And today we're going to come to a section known as the seven signs, because it's seven events, seven images that will be highlighted, spelling a spiritual battle between God and Satan over planet Earth. Now, kids, you're going to hear a lot of things today that aren't in your children's Bibles. And man, as you get older and are able to read independently, I hope you grab an actual Bible and start to read some of the real good stuff that's in there. That's not in your children's Bibles, because there's some good stuff in here today. The red dragon, angel, Michael, the archangel, the beast. There's a second beast. There's a person signified by the number 666. And a lot more today. So you're going to see today, I think, that what happens on earth is part of something much bigger. What happens here on earth is part of a cosmic war being waged in the heavenlies. All of earthly mankind is caught up in a heavenly war between Christ and Satan. And as modern people, we have such a hard time believing this, envisioning this. With all of our sort of science and technology, we tend to ignore the supernatural, but it's there, and we need to see it. We need to understand we have a spiritual enemy called Satan, who leads legions of demons in the spiritual realm and who is opposed to God. And so nothing in our lives ultimately is purely natural. It's all ultimately tied to the supernatural. Our battles with sin, struggles in marriage, fears, frustrations, worries, temptations, everything in our day-to-day life, physical, emotional, relational life, is part of a spiritual warfare that's being waged in the heavenlies. And so again, in these chapters of Revelation, it's not necessarily all chronological here, as if John is saying, well, this happens, and then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen. These visions are giving us a collective picture of different signs and symbols that point us and pull back the curtains to what really is happening in the world. And today, we've been all over the place chronologically in Revelation. Today, we're going to be like going back to the birth of Jesus. And so it just keeps getting real interesting here. So Revelation chapter 12, let me read it for us this morning. A great sign appeared in heaven. Some versions say a great symbolic display happened in heaven, appeared in heaven. John even calls them symbols here. He calls them signs. A great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in labor and agony as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven. There was a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on its heads were 7 crowns. Its tail swept away a third of the stars in heaven and hurled them to the earth. And the dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she did give birth, it might devour her child. She gave birth to a son, a male who was going to rule all the nations with an iron rod. Her child was caught up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God to be nourished there for 1,260 days. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels also fought, but he could not prevail, and there was no place for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was thrown out, the ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the one who deceives the whole world. He was thrown to earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, The salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have now come. Because the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been thrown down. They conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they did not love their lives to the point of death. Therefore, rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you with great fury, because he knows his time is short. When the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, so she could fly from the serpent's presence to her place in the wilderness, where she was nourished for a time, times, and half a time. From his mouth the serpent spewed water like rivers flowing after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth helped the woman. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the river that the dragon had spewed from his mouth. So the dragon was furious with the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep the commands of God and hold firmly to the testimony about Jesus. So a lot happening in this passage, but let's just dive in. Who are the main characters here? Well, there's the child. First of all, there's this son that's born. This seems to clearly be referring to Jesus Christ, the one who's going to rule all nations and who's caught up to God and his throne. Who could this be except Jesus, who was born and then ascends to heaven and is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords? And then there's the woman. We know right away that this isn't a literal woman. Yes, we are to take the Bible literally, but this isn't a literal woman. We are to take the Bible literally when the Bible says that this is a symbol and a sign. And so this woman is clothed with the sun and with the moon under her feet. So if this is a literal woman, then she would be tall, right? And in space. A tall astronaut. The Catholic Church has tried to say that this woman symbolizes Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary seems to kind of fit the bill here because there's this woman who's giving birth, and then the son is Jesus. So, this is Mary. Well, if you keep following that logic, in verse 6, the woman flees to the wilderness, where there's this place prepared by God to be nourished there for 1,260 days. Later, it's a times and half a time. This doesn't all seem to align with what we know of Mary and her life. So, a better explanation is that this woman depicts the people of God. The people of God in the Old Testament, signified by the 12 stars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. The Old Testament, this woman then gives birth to her child, Jesus, and he's taken up into heaven. And then the woman represents the people of God in the Jew-Gentile church, who flees to the wilderness, is nourished for 1,260 days, or 3.5 years, symbolizing the persecution and the ostracization from the world that's experienced by the church. Now, she's nourished there in the wilderness for 1,260 days, or 3.5 years. Now, is this a literal 1,260 days? It would be a bit strange if it was, because if it's a literal 1,260 days, or 3.5 year period, this happens right after the ascension of Jesus, right? So the woman gives birth, her son, her child, ascends to be with God, and then she goes into wilderness for 3.5 years. This would have been 50 years prior to John having these visions. So this would have all happened 50 years previously, and these wouldn't be things that would be happening in the future if this was a literal 1,260 days or 3.5 year period. I'm no expert in Revelation, but I am trying to do the math here. Then, the 42 months, what is it? The 1,260 days, what is it? Well, this number is repeated several different times in Revelation, and we think, many scholars think, it could be referring to the time of tribulation or suffering that the church goes through from the time of Jesus' ascension into heaven to the time of his return. So that's one view that's out there that I think makes a lot of sense. Third, the dragon. So we have the child, we have the woman, and third, the dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. The 7 heads represent knowledge, and the horns represent power. So 10 horns represents enormous power, dominant. power. And the dragon wants to devour the child. John tells us in verse 9 that this great dragon is the ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, the one who deceives the whole world. So no guessing here as to what the dragon represents. It's Satan. It's the ancient serpent. This takes us back to Genesis chapter 3. The serpent, Satan, that deceived Adam and Eve, and as sin entered the world through Adam and Eve. Satan, the ancient enemy of God's people, the one who deceives still today and seeks to lead people into rebellion against God. But in Genesis 3, there was this promise from God. Even with the darkness of the fall into sin, as God cursed the world and cursed the serpent, Satan, God spoke these words to the serpent. He said, I will put hostility between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. So this prophecy of hostility taking place between the offspring of the woman, humanity, and Satan. And this hostility is pictured here in Revelation chapter 12. This hostility is described all throughout the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. When you look at the Old Testament, the Jewish people are one of the ways you can easily understand the Old Testament is if you look at the Old Testament as this great struggle for like survival for the Jewish people. Just trying to continue to survive. And all the miracles that God did to cause them to survive, to cause them to continue on in order to bring Jesus into the world, to preserve them so that Jesus could be born, so that the woman, the people of God, Israel, could bear this child, Jesus. And even after Jesus was born, the hostility between Jesus and Satan is pictured in the infancy narratives in Luke chapter 1 and 2, in Matthew chapter 1 and 2, where we see King Herod going after little baby Jesus, right? Ultimately, Jesus grew up then and stomped on the head of the serpent. And Jesus is brought up to heaven in verse 5, and Satan is thrown down in verse 10. Heaven defeats Satan. Jesus defeats Satan. That's the big headline here. In his death and resurrection, the Lamb who was slain defeats Satan, and the accuser of our brothers and sisters, the accuser of God's people, is thrown down. Satan has been conquered by Jesus. So what does that mean for us? Well, Satan, the accuser, has been conquered. Jesus did what no one has ever done and ever will do. He lived a perfect life, a life free from sin, a life that overcame every temptation that you and I give into every day. And then he died on a cross as a sacrificial lamb to pay the price for sin once and for all. And then 3 days later, he rose from the dead in victory over sin, death, and the devil, so that all who believe in him and who trust in him can be saved from their sin and from the punishment of sin. So, if you're trusting in Jesus, you can remember that the accuser has been thrown down from heaven and can no longer accuse you before God. You can come into God's presence because you're trusting in Jesus, and you can be fully confident that you can no longer be accused by the enemy. My brother's in the Air Force, or was in the Air Force, rather, and one time when we went to visit him, we went on to one of the military bases. And I was driving our family minivan, and Jesse was sitting in the passenger seat. And we pulled up to the checkpoint at the entry to the military base, and they had military police there, soldiers, and they're geared up. I mean, they got their machine guns, I mean, the whole bit, right? And so I pull up, my heart's beating a little bit, I pull up, and I'm thinking, and these guys, as they're walking up to the van, I mean, it's all business, right? They're serious, no smile, no, they're not friendly, all business. And they walk up to my window, and I'm thinking, okay, is this a stop and frisk situation here? Are they gonna search our van? You know, I'm thinking through all the things that we have packed in our van. And my brother reaches over, flashes his ID badge, and he says, they're with me. Guy smiles and waves us right through, right? And listen, as believers, we don't have to fear the accuser. Man, when we're with Jesus, he flashes his credentials and just says, hey, they're with me. There's no accusation that can stick. But are you with Jesus? That's the question. Have you trusted in Jesus as your Savior? And that's the most important question I can ask you, and that's the most important question you can answer on this side of heaven. Are you with Jesus? Are you trusting in him, what the Lamb did for you? Is your life aligned with him? Ultimately, that's how you, too, overcome Satan. Satan has been conquered by Jesus. And listen, Satan is being conquered by Christians as we hold on to Jesus. Look at verse 11. It says, those who conquer Satan conquer him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they did not love their lives even to the point of death. And so what does that mean? Well, we see as we continue, as we progress through chapter 12, once Satan is cast out of heaven, thrown out of heaven, he realizes he can't stop Jesus. He turns to attack the church, the woman, the people of God who believe in him. And it says in verse 13 that he persecutes them. It says in verse 15 he pours out water like a river from his mouth to sweep her away with the flood. The imagery here is Satan is going after God's people, trying to strike them down. And this was going on during John's time in the first century, and this has gone on ever since. It still goes on today. That the ancient serpent is still fighting Jesus by opposing and persecuting the church, making war against her offspring, verse 17 says. And we overcome him by the blood of the Lamb. Not by our power, but by the conquering power of Jesus. And our testimony of what Jesus has done for us by his blood. We hold on to that. We overcome by that. And then we can overcome in suffering, in death even, because Satan has been conquered by Jesus. We too can conquer as we hold on to Jesus. The spiritual battle that's happening today, listen, it's a battle that's already been won. It's a battle that's already been decided. And I hear so many people, as I talk, Christians or not, but I hear so many people wringing their hands over the state of this world. And we know, listen, Christ has won the war already. It's interesting, in the Civil War, on April 9th, 1865, Robert E. Lee met with Ulysses S. Grant at a courthouse in Virginia. And the war ended. If you're keeping score at home, the North won, by the way. But the war ended. Peace had been accomplished. But that same day, there was a battle happening far away in southern Alabama. The war was over in Virginia, but there was a battle that still happened even hours after peace was signed. At Fort Blakely in southern Alabama, the Battle of Fort Blakely was taking place. Peace had not yet extended to Alabama. It still raged on. The fighting was real. The guns were real. The bayonets were real. The casualties were real. The war was over, but the fighting raged on. The battle raged on. And that's a good analogy for Revelation 12. The war has been decided, but peace has yet to be fully enforced. And one day, God is going to come and enforce his victory completely. And evil will be totally abolished. And yet now we find ourselves in the midst of this battle. We fight against temptation. We fight against discouragement. We fight against the accusations of the enemy. But we fight a battle that's already been won. Satan could not stop Jesus. And now he's taking it out on the church. And guess what? He's not going to be able to stop the church either. And even the suffering that the enemy brings to Christians, even the persecution he brings, will inevitably result in our victory if we hold on to Jesus. All right. if you're keeping track of where we have 2 more chapters to go here. So, chapter 13 gives some more detail on the kind of battle that's happening here. The dragon, Satan, is continuing to wage war against the woman, the church. So, let's read Revelation chapter 13 here. Actually, chapter 12, verse 18 says, "The dragon stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast coming up out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads. On its horns were 10 crowns, and on its heads were blasphemous names. The beast I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. The dragon gave the beast his power, his throne, and great authority. One of its heads appeared to be fatally wounded, but its fatal wound was healed. The whole earth was amazed and followed the beast. They worshiped the dragon because he gave authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast? Who is able to wage war against it?' The beast was given a mouth to utter boasts and blasphemies. It was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It began to speak blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his dwelling, those who dwell in heaven. And it was permitted to wage war against the saints and to conquer them. It was also given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All those who live on the earth will worship it. Everyone whose name was not written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slaughtered. If anyone has ears to hear, let him listen. If anyone is to be taken captive, into captivity he goes. If anyone is to be killed with a sword he will be killed. This calls for endurance and faithfulness from the saints. Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast on its behalf and compels the earth and those who live on it to worship the first beast whose fatal wound was healed. It also performs great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in front of people. It deceives those who live on the earth because of the signs that it is permitted to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who live on the earth to make an image of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. It was permitted to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast could both speak and cause whoever would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And it makes everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, the beast's name, or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, because it is the number of a person. Its number is 666. Now there's all kinds of interpretations of what the beast stands for. Is the beast here a physical person? Or is it a particular empire? Or is it an evil spirit behind earthly systems? Now the first readers of Revelation would have almost certainly thought that the beast was the Roman Empire, the government that was forcing everyone to worship the Roman emperor. Today, many associate the beast with the Antichrist, who's mentioned in various New Testament letters, the Antichrist being maybe a series of leaders or a primary leader that would lead people astray through an anti-Christian government. Now, still others don't limit the beast to one particular person or empire in history, but point to various empires, various anti-Christian governments or leaders who oppress and persecute God's people while leading the world astray. And I lean towards this last understanding of the beast, that throughout the history of the church, from the ascension to the return of Christ, there have been and will continue to be governments and leaders and systems and structures that the dragon, Satan, uses to oppress the church and deceive the world. And that doesn't necessarily rule out a specific antichrist or man of lawlessness to come in the days ahead, but the overall point is that Satan exerts his power in this world through governments and systems. And God permits this for a time. He permits the beast to exercise authority. It says for 42 months. Some say that this, again, 42-month or 1,260-day period that keeps getting repeated throughout Revelation. Some say that that's, again, literal, but again, it would be odd for the beast to be symbolic, but the 42 months of tribulation to be literal. So similar to in chapter 12, I take the 42 months to be more of a symbolic expression of the whole time period between the ascension of Jesus and the second coming of Jesus. There's a great video by Dr. Craig Keener called How Long is the Tribulation? You can go ahead and check that out if you want to learn more. But it's not something we're going to debate a ton about today because, remember, we want to focus on what do we know for sure from Revelation. And we know for sure, verse 8 tells us that the result of the beast being on this earth is that all who live on earth will worship it, except for faithful believers. All throughout history, people have worshiped governments, have worshiped government leaders, whether Roman emperors or American presidents. And not only will this kind of worship happen and continue, but as the second beast arrives in verse 11, this kind of worship will be enforced in different ways. And so listen, even today, there will always be a price to pay for believers who do not worship the idols of this world. And according to Revelation, we should expect that there will be a time when the beast forces us as Christians to choose. Will we compromise and bow down to the beast? Or will we stand firm? And kids, listen, even at your young ages, you will be asked to choose. Even at your young ages, you will have friends in your schools, friends in your neighborhoods, family members, cousins your age, people in your life your age that will want you to bow down to worldly systems and philosophies and values of this world. And you will be tempted to just go along to get along. But you will have to choose, am I going to buy into the world's way of thinking and worship the beast of this world, or am I going to worship Jesus? And let me tell you, this will cost you. Life will not be easy in this world for those who resist the idolatry of the world, for those who resist the beast. The beast opposes all who resist him and marks all who follow him. Now, what is the mark of the beast? This is a $1 million question from the book of Revelation. There have been 100 terrible suggestions throughout history of what this is. A century or so ago, people said Social Security numbers are the mark of the beast, because everybody's assigned one and you can't buy or sell without one. You can't get a job without one. So a lot of people thought, it's Social Security numbers 100 years ago, 50 years ago, when barcodes started being utilized. Barcodes were the mark of the beast. And you know, right, that the number 666 is in every barcode. It's hidden in every bar. I read that online this week. And so I know it's true. And people asked me a couple of years ago, people said, don't cancel me for this. But people asked me, they said, are COVID vaccines the mark of the beast? Some of you are already canceling me. Some of you are already, I'm triggering people right now. But do you think the COVID vaccine is the mark of the beast? And I just said, if you look at this passage clearly, it can't be, because it talks about the mark being on the hand and the forehead, and you get the COVID shot in your arm. So it can't possibly, but in all seriousness, it's not going to be something that you accidentally get. Like, it's not going to be something that, oh man, a darn COVID shot, like, I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was the mark of the beast, but oh man, now I got it, and I guess I'm serving Satan now. It's not going to be an accident. This is a conscious choice that someone makes to align with the beast and to oppose God. And why is it 666? Well, often in Revelation, the church has the name of God symbolically written on their foreheads. And the church has a number, remember, 144,000, to symbolize the completion of God's people. And so it makes sense that those who oppose God, those who set themselves up against God, would also have something symbolically written on their foreheads associated not with the number of completion, like the number 7, but incompletion, like the number 6. repeated over and over again. But don't miss the point here. Listen, every person in history, leading up to the end of history, either belongs to God in Christ or belongs to the beast, which means they belong to Satan. Ultimately, everyone will belong to God or Satan. And Satan, all throughout history and continuing today, continues to deceive people through friendly words, through enticing ideologies, through attractive false religions that all subtly yet eternally pull people away from the worship of the one true God. All right. I hope you got one more chapter in you. So, chapter 14, and as you can tell, the commentary is getting shorter with every chapter. So, chapter 14, then I looked, and there was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion. And with him were 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. I heard a sound from heaven like the sound of cascading waters and like the rumbling of loud thunder. The sound I heard was like harpists playing on their harps. They sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders, but no one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. These are the ones who have not defiled themselves with women since they remain virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were redeemed from humanity as the first fruits for God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless. Then I saw another angel flying high overhead with the eternal gospel to announce to the inhabitants of the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He spoke with a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship the one who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water." And another, a second angel, followed, saying, "It has fallen. Babylon the Great has fallen. She made all the nations drink the wine of her sexual immorality, which brings wrath." And another, a third angel, followed them and spoke with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he will also drink the wine of God's wrath, which is poured full strength into the cup of his anger. He will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the sight of the holy angels and in the sight of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment will go up forever and ever. There is no rest day or night for those who worship the beast and its image or anyone who receives the mark of its name. This calls for endurance from the saints who keep God's commands and their faith in Jesus." Then I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on." "Yes," says the Spirit, "so they will rest from their labors, since their works follow them." Then I looked, and there was a white cloud, and one like the Son of Man was seated on the cloud, and a golden crown on his head, and a sharp sickle on his hand. Another angel came out of the temple, crying out with a loud voice to the one who was seated on the cloud, "Use your sickle and reap, for the time to reap has come, since the harvest of the earth is ripe." So the one seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Then another angel who also had a sharp sickle came out of the temple in heaven. Yet another angel who had authority over fire came from the altar, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, "Use your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the vineyard of the earth, because its grapes have ripened." So the angel swung his sickle at the earth and gathered the grapes from the vineyard of the earth, and he threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. Then the press was trampled outside the city, and blood flowed out from the press up to the horses' bridles for about 180 miles. Now, if there's one thing we can learn from Revelation, it's that over and over, God's people end up around the throne. And over, we see this pattern of tribulation, suffering, and judgment. But at the end, God's people are always ending up around the throne. But here we also see, we see a terrifying picture of God's wrath on evil, on the beast, on Satan, and on all who follow the beast. God's wrath on sin and on rebellion against the Creator. God's full cup of his justified anger poured out on sin and injustice, poured out on those who worship the beast. And understand, this is an eternal punishment with no rest. It's an eternal, conscious torment. There are many modern viewpoints on hell. You can go on to YouTube and listen to really, really smart people try to explain away hell. Or there are denominational leaders, even the head of the whole ELCA denomination says that yes, there is a hell, but it's probably empty. Revelation tells us that hell is not empty. And it's eternal. And it's a place of torment. Now, many people wonder, is this fair of God? If I were God, it's always funny when we put ourselves in his shoes. If I were God, is this really fair? Is it fair of God, a loving God, to condemn sinners to eternal hell, to eternal punishment? Now, we're pretty much out of time today. I wish I had a lot more time to talk about this question, but I'll give you one quick drive-by answer to this question. Many people, if they were to describe themselves and they were to describe their morality and their goodness, they would say something like this. If we pictured all of creation, everyone who's ever lived, and we picture them on a continuum from Hitler to, I'm just throwing something out, Mother Teresa. And if we viewed all of humanity on a continuum of goodness, Hitler being like the worst, and Mother Teresa being, I don't know, the best. I don't know much about Mother Teresa, but from what I know, people think she's a good person. So I'm just throwing this out here. Then if you were to take yourself and put yourself on this continuum, where would you put yourself? Well, if you're an average person, you'd say, well, I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I'm not that good, and I'm not that bad. I guess I'll put myself right here. And then I would ask you, okay, is Hitler deserving of eternal hell? You say, yeah, probably, if anyone. I mean, Hitler was bad. And we'd say, yeah, okay, Hitler was deserving of infinite punishment before an infinitely perfect and holy God because of his sin. And I would agree with you on that one. And then if you struggle or wrestle with this question of, how could God condemn people to eternal conscious torment, then I would ask you, at what point on this continuum do you think we should draw a line and say, on this side of the line, people are deserving of eternal conscious punishment, and on this side of the line, people, maybe it's just like, 200 years or something, or 2 weeks. Where would you draw that line? And I guarantee you would draw it to the left of your line, which proves you're biased. You're not fair. You're not objective. This is like if someone is guilty of a crime. If someone robs a bank, and it'd be like the jury going to that person and saying, what do you think your sentence should be? 20 years in prison or 20 hours of community service? You pick. We struggle with this question because we're biased. None of us think that we deserve eternal hell. But we have an infinitely perfect God, and every single one of us fall short of his glory. We infinitely fall short of his glory. But listen, here's the good news. Revelation isn't bad news. It's good news. Listen, because of Jesus, we can overcome. Because of Jesus, no one has to end up in hell. Christianity is fundamentally good news. No one has to choose to worship the beast. We know that many will. But no one has to. No one has to reject God. Everyone can receive the good news of Jesus. And good news changes everything. This reminds me of one of my favorite jokes. A woman was sitting inside an airplane hangar, nervously awaiting the return of her husband from his first skydiving trip. And as she's sitting there, anxiously waiting for him to come back, after a long time of waiting, she finally sees the skydiving instructor coming towards her. And he looks very serious, has a look on his face, serious look on his face, and she says, "Where's my husband?" And the skydiving instructor says, "Ma'am, I have bad news, and I have good news, and I have bad news, and I have good news. The bad news is that your husband fell out of the plane. The good news is that he was wearing his parachute. The bad news is he hit the ground before he was able to pull the ripcord and deploy the parachute. The good news is that we hadn't taken off yet." Good news changes everything, right? And the gospel is fundamentally good news. It's good news for sinners like you and me. It's good news for those who say, "Yes, I don't care where I land on this continuum. I'm in need of the mercy and grace of God." It is good news today, and it is good news for all of eternity. In a moment, we're going to have an opportunity in both services. There will be people who are up front, and maybe there are those here today that want to come forward for prayer and just receive prayer from someone, to pray with someone. Maybe you aren't settled over where you will be in eternity. And that question needs to be settled for you today. And I encourage you, grab someone. If that's not settled for you, grab someone before you leave and ask them to pray with you, to talk with you. Come forward for prayer and confess your sin before God and receive his grace and mercy through Jesus. But we're going to have people in front. There will be an opportunity for any need that you might have this morning. But let me pray as we wrap up this message. Lord, this is heavy. There's a lot here. But just as we understand the magnitude of what we're saved from, as we understand the magnitude of your wrath, we can understand in a greater way the magnitude of your grace. And so we are all the more grateful, all the more thankful for Jesus today. And we want to continue to worship you and hold on to our faith in you. We want to be among those who can say that we have overcome by the blood of the Lamb, Jesus, and by the word of our testimony. And so today we stand in you, and our faith is firm and fixed in you. And we want to be your church, unshakable, that clings to you to the very end. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.